Hello, I'm Lisa Bien, and welcome to Bouncing Back. Transgender is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity differs from the sex they were assigned at birth. The term transgender is not indicative of gender expression, sexual orientation, hormonal makeup, physical anatomy, or how one is perceived in daily life. Male or female or transgender ultimately are all the same. They are people. However, there still seems to be a large amount of societal discomfort in discussing transgender people. Today, we will discuss the terms transgender, transitioning, and we'll meet someone who transitioned from the assigned male at birth and identifies as a female. Let's get started. Hello, I'm Lisa Bien, and welcome to Bouncing Back.
God makes a way.
Be honest and communicate.
Your authentic self. That's so critical. Thanks for joining us on this edition of Bouncing Back. Let's welcome our guest. Drea Richards is the owner and operator of Andre Richard Salon with more than 20 years of experience in the beauty industry. But her story goes more than skin deep. Drea is a transgender person. Drea transitioned over 2 years ago and since has devoted herself to the work that goes into that process. But our discussion is not simply about Drea's transition. It's also about how she overcame challenges in her life and is now helping others by sharing her story. Welcome, Drea. Our next guest is Hazel Edwards. Hazel is an artist, community advocate, and educator. She holds multiple positions, all with the goal of working towards racial and trans liberation. She's incredibly passionate, very outspoken, and is truly dedicated to her work. Hazel is an educator and outreach specialist at Bryson Institute at the Attic Youth Center. In 2016, Hazel was instrumental in co-authoring the School District of Philadelphia's Policy 252, which created protections for transgender and gender nonconforming students. Welcome, Hazel. Welcome, both of you. So this show is near and dear to my heart, and there's so many reasons that I wanted to do this show. It's our second show on this topic. I feel like we could do 3 or 4 shows on this topic.
At least.
Right?
At least.
Because the minute we're born, we're given all kinds, at least, right?
At least.
The minute we're born, we're given all kinds of labels, right? Male, female, I like pink, I like blue, I'm Jewish, I'm Catholic, right? So
Sure.
The goal of this show today is truly to let's clear it all up. Let's get people comfortable with talking about transgender people, and let's even maybe possibly educate our guests about some of the proper terms to use and hear your story. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Awesome.
So Drea, I'm gonna start with you. I'm amazed and impressed, and I just think I'm in awe of you and your story. So if you wanna just share with our viewers, where did it all begin? When did you know?
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, I know, right?
When did I know? When did I know?
Isn't that what people ask you all the time?
Well, sure. I mean, we're not, before there was even any language, before there were any words that could come out of my mouth to describe what was going on, I knew. My first day of kindergarten, I didn't understand why all of these little girls were wearing dresses, and it occurred to me recently, like, I was physically ill. Like, I threw up all over this girl next to me, and I really think that I wasn't sick. I think my nerves were rattled. I don't know. I was 6 years old.
You were 6
but
years
I knew
old.
something wasn't right.
She knew something wasn't right. So isn't that the question that everyone starts with, right? How did you know? And so it's like, how do we educate people on the questions and I've been doing so much research. It's like, your heart and soul, you were a female.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Both of you, your hearts and souls knew that you were a female.
Exactly. So, it has me thinking about posing the question, how did you know you were cisgender?
Right.
Exactly. Like, it's just a feeling that we have and that we hold, and, without even having the language to talk about ourselves, similar to your story, at 5 years old, I knew that I didn't identify as a boy, right? I didn't necessarily know what it was, right? I didn't necessarily know what was happening, but I just knew for me that it wasn't boyhood boyhood or me aspiring to manhood, or all of these messages that was given to me as a young child. I just always knew that I didn't internalize them, or when I did internalize them, it became harder for me to come out as trans.
Yeah. When we're told something as simple as, no, you can't have Barbies, you're a boy. Before I even knew what a boy or a girl was, it wasn't about sexual activity.
I think that's a misconception
when you're
though.
that young, all you know is, I like this, and and that doesn't even have anything to do with gender. If you like to play with Barbies, good. It doesn't make you a boy or a girl or change your gender. But when you are transgender and you know that you love girly things, and you're told no, you can't, when all the other little girls are doing their thing, you start to have these messages early on, and it sets a stage for some confusion and possible disaster.
I would imagine that confusion would lead to fear, disappointment. Instantly.
Yeah, bad feelings.
Yeah, so how did you were 5, right?
Yeah, I guess around that age. I remember, when I was 4 years old, my mother was cleaning. She was always cleaning. She had the bucket out. She's wiping the floor, and I took a running start and kicked it over. Like, that's how much anger I had. That's pretty young to be that angry. I don't know what I was angry about. I was 4 years old, but the stage was being set to be told, no, what you're feeling is wrong. And back then, I'm 400 years old, right? So back then, there was no language. There was no, and then the adults who had sex changes, they were a verb, and they went to blend in the best they could and live their life. And so many didn't because they were afraid,
Living with fear and being a transgender person, I can't imagine what it's like, because we as human beings live with fear constant, so the fear that you experience I would imagine it creates a lot of, because I know that you suffered from some addictions, right?
Sure, yeah.
So it led you to drug addiction?
Yeah, being transgender didn't make me a drug addict or an alcoholic. Being human, you are or you're not. But having this issue sort of made it faster and more furious, and put me in dangerous situations through my life. It didn't turn me into an addict. You either are or you aren't, and your life circumstance fuels that fire, right? But there were absolutely dark times surrounded by this, and right into having a long time abstinent from drugs and alcohol, 15 years in, was when I transitioned, so it was a struggle even without it,
right?
Yeah.
So you're a transgender person, and you have all this fear, and you are looking out and you're saying, I want to wear dresses, right? I guess, how do you start to take that first step forward? That's a whole loaded question, right?
Yeah, when was your first time?
It's very complex. And for me, coming out came in different stages. And so a lot of times I conflated, my gender expression and my mannerisms with a sexual orientation, right? So I took on this gay, right, identity because of the problematic stereotypes that are associated with gay men, right? Which is hyperfeminine, which is all problematic stereotypes of gay men. And so I took on those things and said, okay, so I must be gay, right? Because I used
there was nowhere else to go.
Absolutely. So I used gayness as a way to make up for my feminine mannerisms. And then later on down the line, I came out as liking guys at 14. And then when I was 17, I started to know that something wasn't right. Something wasn't really right. This isn't really who I was exactly really attracted to, or solely attracted to. And I had to do a lot of digging. You know, I suffered from a lot of internalized transphobia. In my experience, I came out.
Can I stop you for
Yeah,
1 second, just because I don't want to
absolutely.
assume that everybody knows what transphobia means, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I really want to make this show about educating the viewers. So could you just stop for 1 second and explain to us what transphobia means?
Yes, so transphobia is the hatred, right, of trans people. And so I believe the stereotypes and the stigma associated with trans women, specifically trans women of color, in my experience. And I internalized, right, all of those negative messages. So I believe the stereotypes, the stigma, and all of those things, you know, the rapid rates of trans women of color murders, right? And one just happened in Philadelphia a few nights ago. And those were some things that I thought to myself, that I would never obtain a job, that I've never, you know, have a partner, that I'll never do all of these things. And so, you know, I suffered from a lot of internalized transphobia, which led me to in and out of mental facilities and partial programs and placements, because nobody knew what was happening to me. And so when I came out in a single sex school, and I don't like to use the language of boys or girls school, right? So I came out of single sex school my mid-senior year, because at that moment I knew I was trans, and at that moment it was a matter of life or death for me, right, to come out.
We know phobia. I mean, I know my internalized transphobia. I mean, first of all, the beauty industry saved my life. I worked in gay bars. We did drag shows. I had some outlet. I had a way to like express myself and be me, you know, and then it was, you know, take off the costume, if you will, or it was almost like take off my real self and put it away for a little while, you know. And, you know, I kind of come from this, I don't want to say old school, but the culture back then was, if you don't pass, if you can't blend into society 100%, you're not going to make it, you're going to be in danger. And for me, that created some transphobia. Like, you know, if I'm not going to pass 100% and be able to just blend in and not have to worry about society, employment, then I'm not going to do it. You know, so my own phobia kept me from doing this for a long time.
And another thing too is when a person says, right, because we use the language of passing because that's what societal set for us.
Okay,
society.
so passing.
Right, and so I'm getting to that
Okay,
point.
because you know I wasn't letting that go.
I'm getting to that
Okay.
point. By saying that somebody's passing or striving to pass, right, is implying that another trans individual is failing, right? And there's no right or wrong way to be transgender, but, you know, society thinks that every trans person's goal in the world is to look cisgender. And cisgender, for the folks at home, right, means CIS, it's spelled CIS, which is pronounced cis, which means the same side as in Latin. So it's when your gender identity and assigned sex are the same. Conversely, you're transgender. And the reason why we have that language is so that when we're talking about trans rights, trans liberation, trans justice, it restrains us from saying trans women and normal women, right? Trans men and real men. When you're either a cisgender person or a transgender person, both are real, both are normal. And so, yeah, so you know, the shift in the community now, right? Because as language and as the political climate changes and shifts, you know, is actually recognizing that, you know, there's trans folks that are here that, you know, don't want to conform, right? That don't want to live in these oppressive gender boxes, right? That reinforce problematic, oppressive, right? You know, ways of living, looking, and being.
It's like they're still handed rules and how they're supposed to be.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that there's rules how we're all supposed to be, but we're going to take a break. We're going to continue our conversation. We're going to continue our conversation on transitioning and transgender when we come right back. Welcome back, and we're talking with our guests Drea Richard and Hazel Edwards about transgender persons, being a transgender person. And on our break, I said, no matter what happens on this show, when it's done, I want somebody to understand, if they're sitting there and if you two did it, right? I want someone to understand that it's scary Takes a lot of courage. Takes a
Yes.
lot of courage.
And a lot of work.
A lot of work. And I want to talk about that work. Because I was watching a lot of videos in prep for this show, and it takes a lot of work. I was watching some people putting on makeup, and I was like, holy moly.
It's a lot of work if you want it to be a lot of work. Again, there's no rules.
I love that. Say it
There's
again.
no rules.
Say it again. There are no rules.
There are no rules.
There are no rules. And I think that oh man, can't we just breathe and just like, that's a wrap, right? There's no rules.
That's
and I
it.
think that's.
Who said?
Who said?
Who said?
Who said? I love that. Who said there's no rules? What I do want to talk about though, and I have a feeling you both have some strong opinions, is Caitlyn. Oh, she took a big old breath. Caitlyn Jenner. I mean, Caitlyn Jenner seems to have helped the transgender people, correct?
Transgender
Community. Yes.
Well, you know, I mean, look,
Yeah,
I did this later in life. You know, I knew pretty early in life. It took me a long time. And I have to say, like, you know, I was concerned with how was I gonna look, you know, because when I was on stage performing, you know, I was pretty. I was young. You know, we're all pretty when we're young, right?
Wait a second.
And
aren't we all still pretty and
we're
young?
all still pretty and young, right? But the depression that I set into, really, you know, I gained weight, I stopped taking care of myself. I really didn't care, you know? So when I got to the point, due to the, I mean, I'm not gonna say Caitlyn Jenner did this, but some of the things that I watched her do in front of the whole world, you know, I mean, Bruce Jenner was on the cereal box that I ate out of every morning. You know, it took a lot of courage to do that. You know, I don't agree with her political views, I think, you know, but her courage as a human to do this in front of everybody, rich or not, to do this in front of people is not easy, especially after you've lived half of your life, right? So I was concerned with how I was gonna look, and I thought, you know what, if she can do it, I can do it, and I started to really research. And I found a YouTube video, Sona Vidian, a wonderful video.
I watched that video last
when I
night.
saw this person, I saw my story. You know, I saw 9 minutes of my story, and it was when the cucumber became a pickle and there was no going back, and I knew it was either you have to do this or suicide was a big option. You know?
Well, I'm glad and thankful that you didn't pick suicide, right?
Yeah,
And so,
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
So you're
know,
here today to share your story
yeah,
with folks, and which
yeah.
is
So I can thank Caitlyn Jenner, you know?
And you?
And not to be devil's advocate in this space.
Well, that's what the show is for.
You know, I definitely give her, you know, I definitely give her that space, right, to share her experience, to share her story, and understanding that it is not easy, right? And, you know, I believe every person should be able to share their experience and share their story. But, you know, this metaphor I like to use is, I believe Caitlyn Jenner opened the door, right, for mainstream to be able to talk about this and have more conversations around trans people and trans identity, but I feel like she should stay at the door, right, greeting people in, you know, and letting the people, right, the more marginalized, you know, trans people that come from intergenerational poverty, who come from, you know, who are people of color, right, who are people who may have experienced incarceration, people who have experienced violence, right, for being trans people, they should be the ones up there talking and representing the larger trans community, because when we look at the larger demographics of the trans community, they don't have all of that privilege that Caitlyn came from, right? You know, people like Janet Mock and Laverne Cox need to be the ones sharing, right, their experiences and their stories for being trans women of color, and, you know, trans person, right, who comes from all of these marginalized intersections, or who that come from these other oppressed groups.
I wonder if Pose is going to help us.
So yeah,
bet it will.
I do have some really good feelings, right, about Pose, but also recognizing that a lot of language have shifted and changed. And there's this one thing that I love, that Lulu is one of the main characters, one of the supporting main characters in Pose, that talks about the oppression totem pole.
So I'm assuming, hold on a second, I'm assuming Pose is a show.
Pose is a show which is about the trans community, or the LGBTQ community of color. They created this ballroom scene, and there's this larger investigation that I guess I give other folks in the room, right, the opportunity to look up, right? If
It was from the creators of American Horror Story on FX. And in the late 80s, a documentary was filmed called Paris is Burning. And I actually did drag shows with some of these queens from the ball scene, and it was released, and it was really it was kind of innovative. I mean, it really let us in on, like, you know, what trans women went through, but it just it barely touched on it. And all these years later, they've created a drama series, which is full of fashion, and it's amazing. But it starts with the basis of the ballroom scene, and from that documentary.
And the ballroom scene was created because a lot of LGBTQ folks were not allowed in because racism, right, was still happening, and it's still happening, right, in the community, in the LGBTQ community. And so these LGBTQ folks in Pose, right, you know, Blanca and Lulu go to this gay bar, which is largely a white gay bar, and they are refused service. And Lulu talked about, you know, it passes the gays, passes the lesbians, and then lands right on our kind, which is the language that she used, which is literally trans women of color, you know, who are getting the bulk of the oppression because of misogyny, transphobia, and racism, and all intersecting at one time. And so I, you know, believe talking about those experiences too, because my experience moving throughout the world as a trans woman of color is going to be different from a white trans woman, right? Because I have that added layer of, you know, race and experience with racism.
So I just wanted to touch on, because we're going to run out of time, because like I said, we could do 3 or 4 shows, and we could just do a whole shows ongoing. But I wanted to talk to both of you. For somebody who's watching right now and is like, yes, that's me. Like they really identify and can relate to you, but they're scared. And we mentioned the amount of courage that it takes to do that. I mean, to be honest, I think you and I, we talked, you said something about living your true self, and how it just felt so good to be able to live your
Just be authentic.
Just be authentic.
Be authentic.
But what would you say to anyone who's home watching the show, and how would you inspire, like, other than your stories are very inspirational, but what would you say to them? What would your message be?
Would you like?
Go for it.
I would like to think about it through the lens of perspective. You know, a lot of times when we talk about the LGBTQ community, we talk about the risk factors, right? Those statistics, those stereotypes. But a lot of times we don't address, right, first of all, the system that, you know, puts these people at risk, right? But we largely talk about those statistics and those stereotypes, and it's all a matter of perspective, because a lot less frequently do we talk about the beauties that the LGBTQ community holds, right? That Pose highlights. And
I love that. Can you say that again, please,
yes.
about the beauty? Because the reason this show is so important to me is because I want people to understand that we're ultimately just all people, and we all have beauty, and the education is so important. I'm sorry, I'll let you finish. I just wanted to say that because it's so important, that I think that everybody needs to really understand that, to your point, just be authentic.
Yeah.
There's no rules.
Look, gender dysphoria is a real diagnosed medical condition.
What is it?
Gender dysphoria. I mean, health insurance now most health insurances cover some sort of treatment for this. Some actually cover, you know, full reassignment surgery, you know, or hormones or therapy. You know, there's no one right way to do this. I think the most important thing is just to be honest with yourself. And if you want to step forward, there are resources, you know. There are resources popping up all over the place, you know, and there's some understanding ears who will at least listen. You know, it doesn't mean you have to, you know, do anything. You know,
isn't that what the Attic is, really a safe haven?
Yes, so the Attic is a LGBTQ youth center, which is located at 16th and Spruce. So I'm going to put in the plug, 255 South 16th Street.
As you should.
Yes, and so the Attic is actually coming up on their 25th anniversary gala that is happening in the beginning of November. And so, yeah, it's a space where LGBTQ folks can show up, show out, right? Because that's a real thing too. And And, you know, that's actually where I started developing language to talk about my trans identity. I started going to the attic when I was 14 years old. And then when I was 17 is when I met my first, right, open trans person. Who was the same age as me, who I, you know, immediately ran to and, you know, became best friends with. And she actually showed me a lot too. But if it wasn't that space, right, that was that was provided, if there wasn't that space to be able to meet folks that looked like me or didn't even look like me, but identified or felt similar
And
things
didn't
that I
judge
felt.
you, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We started taking hormones at the same time. We started doing a whole bunch of things together. And then, yeah, so if it wasn't for the attic, right, maybe I wouldn't have had, maybe I would have came out a little later. Maybe if I didn't, because, you know, I'm not as woke, right, as I was when I was 17 years old.
You're not as what, I'm sorry?
Woke, right, understanding when I was 17. But definitely feel like it would have been a slower role for me coming out as trans. I'm still probably gonna be like who I am today.
So what I would say is the ultimate message for the show as we wrap it up, because I love your message about being your authentic self, being, you know, going to resources, to people who can just hear you, even if you just want to take a step and have someone to talk to.
Just be heard.
Just be heard.
Sometimes that's
judge
all you need. That's all we need, just to be heard.
Thank you so much. You're the best. My thanks to our guests. My thanks to our guests, Drea Richards and Hazel Edwards, for sharing their experiences and insights. Today was an incredible show. We talked about living your life as your true self, and it's just so inspiring how you can go from living a life of sadness and fulfill a very happy life. But it does require hard work, and that work really, truly has to come within. Knowing who you are, what you want, and what you're willing to do to create your best life is essential. I truly hope that today's show reminded you that it's possible to live your best life if you believe in yourself. Remember, always be kind to yourself. Treat yourself like your own best friend. Once again, I'm Lisa Bien, and I look forward to seeing you on our next edition of Bouncing Back. Hello, I'm Lisa Bien, and welcome to Bouncing Back.
God makes a way.
Be honest and communicate.
Your authentic self. That's so critical.